10 days. That's how long it took for the most powerful military in the history of the world to start looking for the exit door. 10 days of bombs, 10 days of fire, 10 days of Iranian missiles arcing over the Gulf. And now Donald Trump, the man who called this whole thing a little excursion, picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin. Not the other way around. Washington placed the call. And that single detail tells you everything you need to know about where this war is actually heading. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what happened in the last 72 hours. We're going to show you why that Putin call is not a routine diplomatic conversation. It's a distress signal dressed up in statecraft language. We're going to show you the numbers behind the oil crisis that is squeezing Trump's political future like a vice. And we're going to explain why Iran, a country that just lost its supreme leader, its navy, most of its missiles, and over 1,000 of its people, is still not blinking. Because the real story is not about who is winning the bombing campaign. The real story is about who is winning the war of time. And right now, that is not the United States. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Nearly 900 strikes in just 12 hours using B-2 stealth bombers, B-52 Stratofortresses, F-35 Lightning jets, and Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from warships in the Persian Gulf. It was the largest American military operation in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In the opening hours, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was assassinated alongside dozens of senior officials. The Trump administration's theory was simple: remove the head and the body collapses. The Iranian people, already in open revolt after a brutal government crackdown that killed thousands, would rise up and the regime would fold. Trump called it a short-term excursion. His energy secretary even posted on social media that the United States Navy had already escorted a tanker safely through the Strait of Hormuz. The markets believed it. Oil prices briefly dropped. Then the White House had to walk it all back. The Navy had not escorted anything. The strait was not open. And days later, the war showed no sign of ending. Here is what the theory missed. Iran was not Iraq. Iran fired back immediately. Within hours of the opening strikes, Iranian ballistic missiles were launched across the Gulf targeting Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps then made a far more dramatic announcement. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows every single day, was closed. Not threatened, closed. A commander warned that any vessel attempting to pass would be set ablaze. And this is where the real war began. Not the military war, the economic war. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil passed through that narrow channel every day. When those ships stopped moving, when insurance companies pulled war risk coverage, and when tankers sat at anchor rather than risk an Iranian missile, the price of oil did something dramatic. It went vertical. Brent crude surged. West Texas Intermediate spiked sharply. Global energy markets began to panic. Ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz collapsed as companies refused to risk their vessels. Fuel prices around the world began rising within days. And that brings us to the phone call, the call that changed the entire geopolitical equation. On March 9th, the White House reached out to Moscow. Washington placed the call. Trump's team described it as a routine check-in, but consider the timing. Trump had not spoken to Vladimir Putin in months. Then suddenly, just days into a Middle East war that is choking global oil supply, Washington urgently needed to get Putin on the line. That is not routine diplomacy. That is a president feeling the walls closing in. After the call, Kremlin officials described the conversation as frank and businesslike, and said Putin had offered proposals aimed at a quick political settlement. In diplomatic language, that is often how major negotiations begin. A few hours later, Trump spoke to reporters and called it a very good call. He said Putin was impressed with what the U.S. military had accomplished. He also said the war could end very soon. But then he said something far more revealing. When asked about Putin helping mediate the Iran conflict, Trump suggested that Putin could instead help end the war in Ukraine. Think about that for a moment. The President of the United States, in the middle of a war he launched in the Middle East, is hinting at negotiations involving Ukraine. In that same call, Putin reportedly described Russia's battlefield progress in Ukraine as highly successful. In other words, Moscow walked into that conversation holding leverage on multiple fronts: leverage over Ukraine, leverage over Iran, and leverage over the global oil market, Russia has every reason to benefit from this situation. If the United States gets tied down in another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict, American attention and resources shift away from Europe, and everyday oil prices remain elevated. Russian energy exports become even more valuable. Meanwhile, Iran is not collapsing. Despite massive strikes and heavy casualties, the Iranian leadership has reorganized. A new supreme leader has taken power. Iran's government has publicly stated that it is not seeking a ceasefire. Its military leadership says missile attacks can continue as long as necessary, and Iranian officials have delivered a direct message to Washington. Even stronger powers have tried to destroy Iran and failed. Inside the Trump administration, the messaging has started to fracture. Trump says the war will end quickly. His defense officials describe the campaign as only beginning. Both statements cannot be true at the same time, and that contradiction reveals something important. Ending wars is far harder than starting them. The Pentagon has already spent billions of dollars on munitions in just the opening phase of the conflict. American casualties have begun to mount. Meanwhile, Iran appears to be adapting. Missile launches have slowed, but analysts say that may not mean weakness. It may mean Iran is pacing its attacks and conserving resources for a longer conflict. That is not collapse. That is strategy. Across the region, Iran's allies are beginning to move as well. Hezbollah has fired rockets into northern Israel. Militias in Iraq have signaled readiness to enter the fight. The conflict is expanding outward. And that brings us back to the Putin call. The most likely path forward is not victory. It is an exit carefully packaged as a triumph. Expect a future announcement declaring that Iran's nuclear program has been crippled, its navy destroyed, and its missile arsenal degraded. Mission accomplished. A deal that allows Trump to claim success, a deal that allows Iran to claim survival, and a deal that positions Vladimir Putin as the key broker who helped end the crisis. If that happens, the real negotiations will shift back to Ukraine, where Moscow will expect something in return. In other words, the architecture of the next geopolitical deal may already be under construction, and the person holding the blueprints might not be sitting in the Oval Office.